A German Shepherd suddenly becomes unusually alert, digging holes at night, refusing to sleep, and growling at someone the family has known for years. No one knows why, until Peyton Barrett, a 29-year-old former Marine, returns to Oak Hollow, Colorado, after 4 years of silence. What made a loyal dog stay on guard for years? And why does he only trust one person? This is Dog Stories, where the most emotional, suspenseful, and real stories about dogs are told like cinematic documentaries. If you believe dogs aren't just companions but silent heroes, hit like, share, and subscribe to Dog Stories so you don't miss a single episode. We truly appreciate every bit of your support. And now, let's begin. The bus rolled slowly into Oak Hollow, Colorado, trailing a thin cloud of dust and the faint squeal of tires over a road speckled with dry leaves. Peyton Barrett rested his forehead against the cool window, eyes fixed on the worn-out landscape gradually coming into view. After 4 years, everything felt both familiar and strangely different. The streets, the trees, they were all still there, but something had changed. Not the town. Him. Peyton wasn't coming home to a parade or a trumpet salute. No one even knew he was arriving today. He wanted it that way. Quiet, simple, no big emotions. But the truth was, he was nervous. Not about his mom, not about his sister. He was worried about Ranger. Ranger was 4 years old now, and in the past 4 years, Peyton hadn't seen him even once. When he left, Ranger was still a clumsy German Shepherd pup. Big ears, long legs, and always running the wrong way around the yard. But his eyes, even as a pup, had something different. Focused, calm, always watching everything around him. They had gone through basic training together before Peyton got deployed. After that, Ranger stayed behind with his mom and sister. He kept telling himself, he's just a dog, he'll forget. But part of him still hoped. The bus stopped at the corner of Maple Run and Auburn Street. Peyton stepped down, military duffel slung over his shoulder, his boots landing with a heavy thud on the worn concrete. The cool autumn breeze brushed the back of his neck. The scent of grass, of earth, of old memories came rushing in all at once. He walked along the sidewalk, passing the bakery where kids used to hang out after school and the old barber shop with its faded sign still barely hanging on. Everything felt frozen in time. But the person coming back wasn't the same young man who had left. The house appeared around the bend. Weathered roof tiles, windows still covered with the same old beige curtains. The mailbox leaned slightly to the right. That tiny detail made him smile. No one had fixed it. Before he could step onto the porch, the door swung open. His mother, Diane, stood there, still holding a dish towel, eyes wide. "Peyton," she said, just that one word, then rushed forward and threw her arms around him. He hugged her tight, and for the first time in years, he felt safe. Her scent hadn't changed, part kitchen, part comfort. Footsteps pounded down the stairs. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming?" Lacey shouted as she ran down, her long hair a mess from sleeping in. She hugged him tight, almost on the verge of tears, but refusing to let them fall. "I didn't want to make a big deal out of it," Peyton said softly, his voice hoarse. The three of them stepped inside. Almost everything looked the same. The faded sofa, the old rug, the family photos still hanging neatly on the wall. But there was one thing missing. "Where's Ranger?" Peyton asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Diane and Lacey exchanged a quick glance. Nothing seemed off. But it wasn't exactly comfortable either. "He's been hanging around the yard," his mom said. "A lot different from when he was younger. Calm, alert, but a little guarded. Especially around strangers," Lacey added. "He picks who he lets in. One time a neighbor came by and he just stood at the door, wouldn't move." Strangers. Peyton let out a small smile. Maybe to Ranger, he was one now. He set his bag down on the floor, heart beating a little faster. It wasn't exactly nerves, and it wasn't fear either. It was that feeling only someone who's been away too long would understand, wondering if the memory you've held on to still exists in real life. A soft sound came from the backyard, then silence. "You want me to call him?" Lacey asked. Peyton shook his head. Let him decide. And so they waited. Soft footsteps on the wooden floor, then the slow, deliberate tapping of claws down the hallway. The house fell into a tense silence. Diane and Lacey stepped to the side, their eyes fixed on Peyton. He stood motionless in the center of the living room, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes locked on the slightly open back door. Ranger appeared in the doorway like a shadow, much bigger than the image Peyton had kept in his mind. No longer the clumsy pup that used to lose his way. Now a fully grown German shepherd, solid frame, defined muscles beneath a dark coat, ears sharp, eyes cold, calculating. For a moment, the two stared at each other like strangers from different worlds. Peyton spoke softly. "Ranger?" No reaction. Those eyes stayed locked on him. Ranger's mouth opened slightly, upper lip curling just enough to reveal his canines. A low growl rumbled in his throat, not aggressive, but a clear warning. "It's okay, baby," his mom whispered, but Ranger didn't take his eyes off the man standing in the middle of the room. Peyton swallowed hard. He stayed completely still. Old training kicked in. Don't hold eye contact too long, no sudden movements, lower your voice, stay calm. "It's me, bud," he said more softly, almost a whisper. The growling stopped. Ranger raised his head slightly, ears folding back just a little. His eyes blinked quickly. A strong exhale blew out through his nose. Then, a sudden movement. Quick, like a snap. Ranger lunged toward Peyton. His mom let out a startled gasp. Lacey flinched back. Peyton didn't move, didn't step away. He just stood still. And then, no bite. No growl. Ranger didn't attack. Instead, the dog crashed into him, full body. A powerful leap that knocked them both off balance, and Ranger collapsed against him like a trembling, warm mass. A soft, whimpering sound came from deep in his throat. Ranger shoved his head into Peyton's chest, pressing hard, over and over, like he needed to be sure this wasn't a dream. Peyton dropped to his knees, wrapping both arms around his neck. "Oh God. You still remember me?" Ranger answered by licking his face over and over. No hesitation, no pause. His tail whipped wildly, thumping against the wooden floor. That serious grown-up frame, that disciplined stance, gone. All that was left was a dog overflowing with emotion, no longer holding anything back. "This is insane," Lacey murmured, her eyes glassy with tears. Their mom wiped her cheeks, smiling through it all. "He's been waiting for you. 4 years. Ranger still wouldn't leave Peyton's side. Every time he loosened his arms, the dog pressed his head back into his chest, like he was afraid Peyton might vanish if he let go. Then suddenly, as if remembering something, Ranger jumped up and bolted down the hallway. His claws scratched lightly against the floor until he disappeared from view. Probably grabbing a toy, Lacey guessed. Peyton didn't get a chance to respond. Ranger was already back. But it wasn't a ball or a bone in his mouth. It was an old, worn-out fabric cap, his military hat, the one with Peyton's name stitched inside. Peyton froze. That hat had stayed with him through all of training. The day he left, he thought he'd lost it, maybe at the airport, maybe in the car. He never imagined it had survived. And more than that Ranger had kept it. Ranger laid the hat gently in front of Peyton, like he was offering something sacred. It was a little dirty, but not torn, not crumpled. It had been hidden and protected with care. "Every time one of your letters came," his mom said, her voice catching, "he'd pull that hat out and lie next to it. But no one else was allowed to touch it. A neighbor tried once, and he growled for the rest of the day." Peyton lifted the hat with both hands, like he was afraid it might fall apart. "He kept this for 4 years?" "Yeah, hid it so well, none of us could ever find it. He only brought it out once in a while." Peyton pressed the hat to his chest. Ranger leaned in, resting his head against it, eyes half closed, letting out a soft whine that sounded like a sigh. A quiet sense of peace swept through the room, like everything had finally fallen into place. In that moment, Peyton didn't need any more proof. Ranger was still his. And for 4 years, without a word, without a promise, that dog had kept one vow. He waited for him to come home. The next morning, Peyton woke earlier than usual. He still wasn't used to a soft bed, the scent of clean sheets, or the strange quiet that filled the room. But the first thing he noticed wasn't the sunlight slipping through the window. It was Ranger, sitting silently at the foot of the bed. The dog wasn't sleeping, wasn't whining, wasn't moving. He just sat there, eyes locked on the door, ears perked like he was listening to something no human could hear. "Are you standing guard?" Peyton asked softly, half joking. Ranger didn't respond, just flicked his eyes toward Peyton for a second, then turned back to his post. Last night, after their emotional reunion, Peyton thought Ranger would go back to being the friendly dog he used to be. But he didn't. Something was still different. Not distance, but alertness. In the days that followed, Peyton noticed that Ranger would often leave the room around midnight. No howling, no barking, just a quiet walk through the back door, disappearing into the yard. He tried following him. Under the dim moonlight, Ranger moved smoothly across the grass, circled the large oak tree near the fence, then stopped at a corner of the yard by the old tool shed. He began pawing at the ground. Not frantic, but with purpose. Same spot, same behavior. Every night. Peyton asked his mom and Lacey, but they both just shrugged. Probably smells something, Diane guessed. Sometimes squirrels or groundhogs dig around back there. But Peyton wasn't convinced. He'd done basic K-9 training. He could tell the difference between random curiosity and a systematic pattern. Ranger wasn't playing. He was checking. Patrolling. One afternoon, while Peyton was repairing the rotted fence behind the house, Caleb Brooks showed up. A former squad mate, now working with the local animal control. Caleb was one of the few people who had stayed in touch while Peyton was away. "Heard you were back? Figured I'd run into you here sooner or later," Caleb said, flashing a friendly smile. He wore a rolled-up shirt and held a bag of dog treats in one hand. "Brought something for Ranger. Think he still remembers me?" Ranger appeared from behind the house just as Caleb stepped into the yard. His eyes immediately locked onto the man. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Not loud, but enough to make Caleb pause. "Hey, buddy," Caleb said softly, lowering the bag. "We used to be pretty tight, remember?" Ranger didn't move, but the growl didn't stop. He didn't charge, didn't bark, just stood firm between Caleb and Peyton, his posture slightly lowered, ready to react if he had to. "What's going on?" Caleb chuckled nervously. "Last time I saw him, he was licking my face like family." Peyton stood up, wiping sweat from his forehead. He didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but the look in Ranger's eyes gave him pause. It wasn't fear, it was instinct. "Maybe he's just not used to people after being home for so long," Peyton said calmly. "He's changed a lot." Caleb nodded. "Yeah, dogs can be like that sometimes, but if you ever need help retraining him, I'm happy to step in." Ranger stepped back as Caleb tried to move closer. He didn't turn his head, didn't break eye contact. After a few tense minutes, Caleb said his goodbyes and headed out. When the gate clicked shut behind him, Ranger slowly straightened up, but kept staring at that gate for a long time. That night, Peyton sat by the bedroom window, eyes fixed on the backyard. Ranger lay at his feet, seemingly asleep, but his ears twitched at every sound beyond the fence. Peyton leaned down and gently stroked the dog's head. "What are you protecting out there, huh, Ranger?" Ranger didn't respond, but in that moment, Peyton no longer believed his dog was just reacting on instinct. Something was happening in that quiet yard. Something only Ranger knew, and he was trying to show him. The next morning, the sky was unusually gray. Thick clouds hovered over the distant mountain range, casting a cold silver hue across the backyard. Peyton stood at the corner of the yard where Ranger always went at night, eyes fixed on the ground like he was trying to decode something. Ranger stood beside him, silent, but his gaze locked onto the exact patch of soft earth he'd been digging. "You still want me to look here, huh?" Peyton whispered. Without waiting any longer, he grabbed a small shovel from the storage shed and began to dig where Ranger had clawed before. The soil had clearly been disturbed, dug up, and carefully covered again. It was softer than the surrounding ground. Ranger stayed right behind him, not moving an inch. After just a few layers, the faint sound of metal rang out beneath the shovel. "There's something down here," Peyton murmured, his heartbeat picking up. He knelt down and gently brushed away the dirt surrounding the object he had struck. A rectangular metal box slowly emerged, old, lightly rusted around the edges, but still intact. No lock, just a lid sealed tight by pressure. He glanced at Ranger. The dog's ears were perked, eyes sharp, body tense. His tail didn't wag, but every muscle was alert. Peyton opened the box. Inside was a piece of cloth, neatly wrapped. Unfolding it, he found an old military badge, etched with a silver star and the words, "Redstone K-9 Facility, 1999. On the back, a serial code and the word classified were engraved. Just beneath the badge sat a yellowish-brown envelope, sealed with red wax. No sender. Only 3 words handwritten in black ink, for Peyton. Peyton sat still for a few seconds. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the envelope. He recognized that handwriting. Even after more than a decade, he couldn't forget it. It was his father's, Thomas Barrett, The man who once worked for a specialized military training unit and who mysteriously disappeared when Peyton was just 16. They only ever found his car, abandoned on the side of the road near Redstone Base. No body. No trace. Since that day, no one spoke of it again. His mother always avoided the topic, and the case was sealed under the label of National Defense Confidentiality. Ranger stepped forward, lowered his head to sniff the metal box, then looked up at Peyton with a strange intensity. As if he knew. Peyton took a deep breath and slowly opened the envelope. Inside were 2 folded pages, 1 handwritten letter, and a black and white scan. Looked like a military document. He started with the letter. Peyton, if you're reading this letter, it means Ranger has completed the first part of his mission. I don't have much time to explain, but you need to understand, everything I did wasn't for me. It was for our family and for the incredible beings you've always loved. Ranger is not just a dog. He's part of Project Guardian, a top-secret program designed to develop canine units capable of situational awareness and independent decision-making. But that project, it went off course, and I stood against it. Ranger is one of the few guardian dogs trained under the original version of the program, the version that still valued compassion. When I disappeared, it was because I took the evidence with me, and now that evidence is here. With you. Don't trust everyone who says they used to be a friend of your father. You need to be careful. Ranger will know who can truly be trusted. Follow his instincts, always, Dad. The paper slipped from Peyton's hand. Ranger remained beside him, eyes fixed on his face. It wasn't the eager or innocent look of an ordinary dog. It was the gaze of a soldier, waiting for his commander to receive orders. Guardian. Peyton repeated, almost to himself. He picked up the remaining scan. It was part of a report detailing the K9 experimental program at Redstone. One section stood out. Test subject, GS02, codename Ranger. Breed, male German Shepherd, born 2018. Status, above standard response, absolute loyalty to one individual only. Peyton wasn't sure what hit him harder, the information itself, the realization that his father had still been alive when he wrote those words, or the feeling rising in his gut now, that everything Ranger had done these past few days wasn't instinct, it was a mission. And now, that mission had been passed on to him. Peyton sat frozen at the kitchen table, his father's letter spread out in front of him, the military document tucked beside it. Ranger lay at his feet, head resting on his front paws, but his eyes were wide open, locked on the door, as if watching something unseen. The soft sound of running water and the warm scent of waffles filled the kitchen, but no one spoke. The air inside the house had turned still ever since Peyton read the letter and quietly whispered the words, Project Guardian. Diane set the dishes down so gently they didn't make a sound. Lacey stared at the documents on the table, not out of curiosity, but because something deep inside her had just been stirred. Project Guardian. That sounds familiar, Lacey said, her voice so quiet it barely registered. Peyton looked up. Where did you hear it? Lacey frowned slightly, her eyes locked on the file with Ranger's codename. I remember once seeing Dad write that phrase in a small black notebook he used to hide in the desk drawer in his study. I was too young to understand back then, but now that I think about it, it was definitely there. Diane froze. She went silent for a few seconds, then slowly sat down beside her son. Your brother's right. That name isn't new, she said softly. Before your father disappeared, he changed a lot. He wasn't as relaxed as he used to be, always tense, quiet. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night, startled. Peyton looked at his mother, eyes urging her to go on. One night, she continued, he got up around 2 in the morning. I followed him out to the backyard. He was standing right at the corner near the tool shed. The same spot you and Ranger dug up yesterday. Diane's gaze flickered, her voice just barely steady. He just stood there, exactly like Ranger has been doing these past few nights. Peyton's hand clenched into a fist. And that night, his mother continued, he whispered something to Ranger. I couldn't make out the words, but it was clear he was giving him instructions, a mission. Lacey suddenly remembered something. I do remember one time, right after Ranger came back from training, Caleb dropped by. Ranger barked like crazy, not his usual bark. It was different. Peyton glanced at Ranger, who still lay stone still, only his ears twitching now and then at the sounds outside. Did Dad ever mention Caleb to you? He asked. Diane thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. He did. Just once. He said, Caleb knows too much, and then he never brought it up again. Peyton turned back to the documents. He flipped over the scan, and this time he noticed a small marking at the bottom. G02, handler assigned, T. Barrett. His father hadn't just trained Ranger. He was the one directly responsible for him. Ranger wasn't just a pet, he was a partner. And it seemed that, in those final days before disappearing, his father hadn't only hidden the documents, he had entrusted part of the mission to Ranger. Mom, Peyton asked, did anyone ever come to the house looking for Dad's files? Diane thought for a moment. Yes, there was a stranger dressed like a government official. Polite, but too curious. Asked a lot of detailed questions about Ranger's odd behavior. Your father kicked him out. Peyton sat in silence. Everything was starting to line up. Ranger hadn't changed just because of age. He was carrying out a mission, one his father had given him, and he was protecting something. Maybe not just the house, but the secret behind Project Guardian. And Caleb, the old friend, might not be as harmless as he seemed. Peyton looked at Ranger, a heavy but undeniable feeling tightening in his chest. All this time, he thought he was the one protecting everyone. But maybe it was Ranger who had quietly carried that weight, for the family, for his father, and now for him. That afternoon, the wind picked up. The pine branches in the front yard whispered and rustled, like nature was trying to speak to the house itself. Peyton was helping his mother sort through old boxes in the garage when the sound of the gate bell broke the quiet. Diane set down a box of books, wiping her hands on her apron. I'll get it. But Ranger got there first. He shot to the front door like an arrow, no barking, no growling. Just stood there, body stiff, tail held straight, locked in a full alert stance. Peyton walked over, peeking through the curtain. It was Caleb. The old friend stood at the gate holding a paper bag, wearing the same bright smile as always. Brought some meat pies for Ranger, he called out. Made 'em myself. Peyton hesitated for a moment, then opened the gate. Didn't expect you to drop by, he said, trying to keep his tone casual. Noticed an unfamiliar car parked near your place, Caleb replied, stepping inside, eyes glancing around like it was nothing. Figured it had to be you. Ranger stayed rooted by the door. The moment Caleb stepped onto the porch, the dog reacted instantly. A sharp, chilling growl echoed from his throat. Not a warning like, stay back, but a sound that meant ready to strike. Whoa, hey buddy, it's me, Caleb said, taking a step back with his hands raised. Peyton tilted his head slightly, signaling Ranger to ease off, but the dog didn't budge. His eyes locked on Caleb, narrowing slightly, ears pressed tight against his head as if calculating a threat. And something in that stare, colder than usual. What's gotten into him? Caleb forced a smile. Thought we were friends. Peyton didn't answer right away. In his mind, his father's letter echoed again. Ranger will know who can truly be trusted. Caleb set the paper bag on the porch table. Well, I guess he can have it when he cools down. He paused, noticing Peyton was still staring at him, unblinking. Something wrong? Caleb asked, his voice dropping slightly. Peyton slowly shook his head, but his gaze never left him. No, I was just thinking. We used to be close friends. But looking back, maybe I never really knew you. Caleb let out a soft chuckle, but something flashed in his eyes, something that didn't feel familiar. What are you talking about? Project Guardian, Peyton said, voice low but steady. You ever heard of it? Silence hung for a beat, just long enough to tell someone was scrambling to find the right response. And Ranger, as if to confirm something, let out another low growl. Caleb blinked. I don't know what you're talking about. You used to work with my father, Peyton continued, eyes locked on Caleb. I found the documents, and a letter. He mentioned you. Caleb's face didn't change, but his hand tightened slightly. So what, you think I'm some kind of double agent? He asked, half smiling, half challenging. I'm not sure what I think, Peyton replied, but Ranger seems pretty certain. By now, Ranger had moved from the door. He circled around Peyton, placing himself squarely between the two men, back arched, a low growl building in his throat. It was the stance of a trained attack dog, waiting for the command. All right, Caleb said, stepping back. I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but take my advice. Stop digging. There are some things better left buried. Like the metal box buried in the yard? Peyton asked, eyes narrowing with a flicker of sharpness. For the first time, Caleb's expression completely cracked. His face went stiff. "Good luck, Barrett," he said quickly, then turned and walked away. The gate clicked shut behind him, but Ranger didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the path, razor-focused, until Caleb's figure disappeared beyond the fence. Peyton looked down at Ranger. "He knows," he whispered. Ranger glanced up, then turned his head toward the backyard, toward the spot where the box had been unearthed. Then he looked back at Peyton. There was no doubt anymore. Ranger was trying to tell him, this isn't over. The next afternoon, Peyton left the house without telling his mom or Lacey. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, silent but alert. It wasn't the usual excitement of a dog going for a ride. This was something else. The focused stillness of a bodyguard on duty. Their destination was his father's old storage shed, tucked at the edge of town, near the overgrown grounds of the abandoned Redstone military zone. As a kid, Peyton had gone there with his dad a few times, but after the disappearance, his mother had locked it up and left it to gather dust and silence. The heavy iron key was still in his mother's desk drawer. Peyton had taken it the night before, right after the confrontation with Caleb. He needed answers, and he knew this place might be the missing link. As the truck turned onto the dirt road leading to the shed, Ranger suddenly sprang up. He planted his front paws on the dashboard, staring intently through the windshield. A low growl rumbled from his throat. "What is it?" Peyton asked quietly. Ranger didn't respond, but something had definitely set him off. Peyton scanned the surroundings. No cars behind them, no people in sight. But the chill creeping up his spine felt real. He parked in front of the rusted metal door. Tall weeds had grown over half the path. Sliding the key into the lock, Peyton turned it once. The door groaned open slowly, hinges shrieking with age. A wave of musty air hit him, damp, rust, and the thick scent of old paper. Ranger didn't step inside right away. He stood at the threshold, sniffing the air deeply several times before moving forward. His steps were slow, ears fully perked like a soldier sweeping for mines, inch by inch. Inside, there were dozens of wooden crates, plastic bins, and stacks of dust-covered documents. Peyton flicked on his flashlight and started digging. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, just that he had to find it. Nearly 30 minutes in, he opened an old cardboard box tucked in the corner of the room. Inside was a thick stack of documents bound with a faded cloth strap, labeled "Our Dog, Guardian Prototype." His hands trembled as he flipped to the first page. It was a report analyzing the training process of military dogs under an enhanced response model, increased reflex conditioning, independent signal retention, even the ability to identify threats based on human behavior patterns. This wasn't standard canine work, it was something far beyond. The second page made Peyton's heart pound. Subject: GS-02 Ranger Phase 2 Trial. Response to potential threat. Subject's result: capable of distinguishing between familiar, disguised, actual danger. Ranger wasn't just a loyal dog. He was part of an experiment to create beings capable of threat assessment far beyond standard limits. Peyton was still reading when Ranger suddenly let out a deep, fierce growl. The dog spun toward the door, body dropping low, growling louder now, intense and unrelenting. Peyton switched off the flashlight and rushed to the narrow doorframe, peering outside. In the harsh midday light, he clearly saw a figure moving quickly along the dirt path beyond the fence. This wasn't just a casual passerby. The man wore a dark jacket, a cap pulled low, and kept glancing back toward the shed as he walked. He never stopped, but a few minutes later, as Peyton's truck rolled out of the property, he spotted a black SUV parked about 200 meters away. Its headlights flicked off just as he turned onto the main road. Peyton glanced at Ranger. Neither of them made a sound, but both knew the truth. They were being watched. The question wasn't if anymore. It was who. Peyton woke in the middle of the night to a soft noise, not loud, not clear, but just enough to jolt the instincts of someone who'd lived through war zones. He didn't turn on the light. Instead, his hand reached under the bed. Ranger wasn't there. A chill shot down his spine. He shot up and moved quickly into the hallway. Everything inside the house was still. The faint glow of nightlights spilled from his mother's and Lacey's rooms. But the back door was ajar. Peyton rushed into the kitchen, heart pounding. The door leading to the backyard was slightly open, the latch bent, like someone had tried to force it from the outside. And then a growl. Deep. Fierce. Coming from the backyard. Without hesitation, Peyton grabbed the flashlight and folding knife from the table and bolted into the yard. The wind was stronger than any night before, whipping leaves through the air, tree shadows stretching long over the damp grass. Near the old shed, Ranger stood in full combat stance. In front of him were 3 strangers, dressed head to toe in black, faces obscured by masks and hoods. One of them held a device, some kind of scanner or code reader. "Step back," Peyton shouted, aiming the flashlight toward them. But as his voice rang out, 2 of the men charged forward. Ranger reacted faster than Peyton could have imagined. The dog lunged, hitting the man on the left with a precise strike to the ribs. The attacker crashed backward, weapon flying from his hand. Ranger didn't bite. He growled, low and deadly, pinning the man to the ground, though keeping him completely still. The second man pulled out a long syringe, but before he could get close to Peyton, a sharp whistling sound cut through the air. Lacey, from the second-floor window, she hurled a heavy flashlight down, hitting the attacker square in the shoulder. He stumbled. Peyton charged, sweeping the man's legs out from under him and yanking the knife from his grip. The third man turned and bolted. Ranger left his first target without hesitation, pivoting and tearing after the runner like a storm unleashed. It took only seconds, but Peyton knew. Ranger had been trained for moments exactly like this. He forced the 2 remaining men face down onto the grass, securing their hands behind their backs with cloth straps taken from the shed. Ranger returned minutes later, calm but alert, and in his mouth, he carried the third man's mask. The runner had escaped, but he hadn't disappeared without leaving a trail. The police arrived 15 minutes later, but the intruders had no IDs, no devices, no way to trace who they were. They were taken into custody, though the officer on scene didn't seem fully convinced by Peyton's story. But that didn't matter. Peyton and Ranger knew this wasn't over. When everyone else went back to bed, Peyton stayed up. Ranger lay beside him, eyes wide open, body still coiled like a spring. "You've known about this for a long time, haven't you?" Peyton whispered. Ranger didn't respond. But a few seconds later, something shifted in his eyes. It was subtle, like a memory surfacing. And in the silence that followed, Peyton felt it. A current of memory flowing through those eyes, as if Ranger was remembering everything. In Ranger's mind, like an old blurred reel of film, an image flickered into view. Thomas Barrett stood in the center of the Redstone training yard, one hand holding a leash, the other resting calmly by his side. His eyes were locked on a young Ranger, still small but already impossibly focused. His voice rang out, steady and firm. "A guardian doesn't just protect. A guardian knows right from wrong, makes the call when no orders come." Ranger, still just a pup then, understood that gaze. For months after, the training wasn't just about commands or tactics. It was about choices, moral scenarios, learning to read intention, emotion, tone, even micro-reactions in the human body. One day, a senior officer had cornered Thomas, demanding he hand over experimental files. Ranger had stepped between them. No growl, no attack, just stillness, an immovable wall. The memory faded and silence returned. But in Ranger's eyes, it left behind something deep, something that had never truly gone away. Peyton sat down on the floor, back resting against the bed. His eyes met Ranger's. "You remember everything, don't you?" Ranger lay back down, resting his head gently on Peyton's leg, letting out a low, quiet whine. Not a sound of fear, not pain, but resolve. Outside, rain began to fall, soft drops tapping against the metal roof. But inside Peyton's chest, something heavier settled. There was no more doubt, no more waiting for answers. Ranger wasn't just a dog. Not anymore, not the same pet from 4 years ago. He was a bearer of memory, a living witness. The last soldier carrying out a mission Thomas Barrett had left behind, and now he was completing it. With instinct, with memory, and with a loyalty that defied everything nature ever wrote. The next morning, Oak Hollow looked as peaceful as ever, like nothing had happened. But inside the Barrett house, normal no longer existed. Peyton poured himself a cup of coffee, eyes fixed on the window. Ranger sat beneath it, still as stone, eyes locked on the street beyond. Lacey walked in, phone in hand. "There's a message. Unknown number," she said, placing it on the table. Peyton picked it up. Just one line. You shouldn't dig up the past. Some things were meant to stay buried. No name, no location, but Peyton knew exactly who had sent it, and this time he wasn't going to stay quiet. That afternoon, he called Caleb himself. "I want answers," Peyton said, "one last time." They met at the empty lot behind the old library, a place that used to be a secondary training ground for the Redstone base. Peyton came alone, but Ranger refused to stay behind. The dog walked beside him from the moment they stepped out of the car, a silent shadow. Caleb was already there, hands in his coat pockets. The friendly smile was gone. His eyes were colder now, harder. "So you figured it out," Caleb said, skipping the small talk. "Not by luck," Peyton replied. "Because of my father and Ranger." Caleb's gaze flickered as it landed on the dog. "It still remembers everything, huh?" "It remembers exactly who it should trust," Peyton said, voice tightening. "You worked with my dad, and you betrayed him." Caleb exhaled sharply. He was naive, thought guardians should stop at moral reasoning and protection. But the higher-ups wanted more. They wanted control. Behavior programming. "And my father wouldn't go along with it," Peyton said, every word like stone. "He wanted to burn it all down," Caleb said. "Expose everything to the public. If he'd succeeded, the whole system would have collapsed. I did what had to be done to preserve what he could never understand." Ranger growled low. Caleb instinctively took a step back. "And the break-in at my house? The stolen files? The threats?" Peyton asked, eyes locked. "Not all of it," Caleb admitted. "But I didn't stop them either. I needed to know what you'd uncovered." "What I found," Peyton said, fists clenched, "was the truth, and a dog more loyal than any human who ever touched that program." Caleb stared at Ranger. "It's the last one, GS02, the final guardian. Every other subject was either destroyed or reprogrammed. Only this one slipped out of their control." "Because it doesn't need to be controlled," Peyton replied. "It chooses loyalty, reason, the kind of integrity people like you could never program." Caleb clenched his jaw, then gave a cold, bitter smile. "So what now? You planning to go to the authorities? You think they don't already know?" Peyton pulled a small recorder from his jacket. "This conversation's being recorded live, and I have copies of everything my father hid. Experiment logs, documents, his official statement, all sent to people you can't touch." Caleb didn't move, but his eyes shifted, colder now, sharper, calculating. "Don't push me," he said. "I'm not," Peyton replied. "Ranger is." At that, Ranger took a single step forward, not fast, not threatening, but deliberate, focused, his eyes never leaving Caleb's. Caleb backed away again. "It won't," Ranger let out a low growl, just one, but it was enough. A signal, the final warning, and Caleb understood. It was over. 3 days later, the truth surfaced. A group of independent investigative journalists published a 40-page expose on Project Guardian, an unregulated experimental program where military canines were pushed beyond ethical limits, some even subjected to behavior reprogramming through neural wave manipulation. Listed under project coordinators was Caleb Brooks. Military police launched a full investigation. The documents Peyton had turned over, his father's files, the hidden recordings, and the recovered logs became the final piece that brought the entire operation crashing down. Caleb was arrested. Several high-ranking officials within the military system were suspended, pending further charges, and Ranger was officially identified as the last guardian dog still intact. The only one who had never been altered. The only one who had remained truly loyal. That night, after the news had spread everywhere, Peyton sat on the back steps of the porch. Ranger lay beside him, head resting on his leg, breathing steady and calm. Peyton looked down at his dog. "We did it." Ranger didn't answer, but his eyes drifted toward the distant mountains, where moonlight stretched like a promise kept. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to doubt. Only one truth remained. Ranger wasn't just the guardian of the past, he was the one who saved the future. Autumn in Oak Hollow always carried something special. The leaves turned a brilliant gold, the air crisp enough to slow life down just a little. But for Peyton Barrett, this was the first fall that truly felt peaceful. No more strange phone calls, no more cautious stares from unfamiliar cars parked down the street. No more midnight growls from Ranger, because now his mission was complete. That afternoon, Peyton and Ranger sat beneath the big oak tree in the backyard, the same spot where, not long ago, they'd unearthed the metal box that held secrets buried for years. A light breeze swept through, sending leaves drifting down, landing gently on Peyton's jacket and the thick fur on Ranger's back. Peyton tossed an old rubber ball, one of the few toys left from Ranger's puppy days. The dog watched it for a moment, then calmly got up and trotted over, picked it up, and brought it back. Not rushed, not on command, but as if he was finally just enjoying the moment. No more standing guard, huh? Peyton smiled, gently stroking Ranger's head. The dog let out a soft whine and rested his head on Peyton's leg. That simple gesture reminded Peyton of something he hadn't truly felt during all those years in uniform. Safety. Now, in every breath, every calm step Ranger took, that feeling was slowly coming back, not just to Peyton, but to the whole house. That night, the family gathered around the dinner table. His mom had made lasagna, his dad's old favorite, and Lacey couldn't stop retelling the story of how Ranger had taken down the intruder like a real-life superhero. Everyone laughed, but something lingered in Diane's eyes as she looked at Ranger. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, harder to name. The quiet realization that this dog wasn't just a pet. He was family. A living connection to a husband now gone, a part of a man who had left behind far more than he ever put into words. After dinner, Peyton opened the old wooden box his father once kept locked. Inside was an aged photograph, Ranger as a pup, sitting beside Thomas Barrett on a training field. On the back, in bold, deliberate handwriting, "Guardians don't need orders, they just need love, and a reason to protect." Peyton read the words out loud. Ranger lifted his head to meet his eyes, then slowly turned and rested his head on Diane's leg, as if to say he understood every word. A few weeks later, the government officially issued a statement announcing the permanent closure of Project Guardian. But during a special press conference, a high-ranking official said, "It's not because the program failed. It's because one Guardian truly fulfilled its mission. No modifications, no reprogramming. A dog that proved loyalty, instinct, and love can surpass any system." No name was mentioned, but in the quiet town of Oak Hollow, everyone knew they were talking about Ranger. Now that it was all behind him, Peyton chose to slow life down. He opened a small dog training school on the outskirts of town, not to teach commands, but to help people and dogs understand each other better. Ranger was always there by his side during every session, and just having him nearby was enough to calm even the most anxious dogs. To the neighborhood kids, Ranger was a superhero dog. But to Peyton, Ranger was a witness, a companion, a silent guardian for a family that nearly slipped into darkness. And above all, a friend who never left his side, even in silence. If you've made it this far, maybe Peyton and Ranger's story touched something in you too. Have you ever had a four-legged friend who made you feel safe, who loved you without conditions? Share their story with us in the comments. Tell us about that one special friend, because sometimes it's the smallest stories that make our hearts grow the biggest. And if you believe dogs like Ranger deserve to be remembered, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Dog Stories, where loyalty, love, and life's greatest lessons always have a voice. And if you believe that dogs aren't just pets, but true friends, silent heroes, hit subscribe to join us here at Dog Stories, where honest stories always find someone willing to listen. We'll be back tomorrow with a new story. But something tells us the feeling Ranger left behind might just stay a little longer.